What is going on? I want to welcome you from Half Court for today, Monday, October 24th, 2022. I'm your host, Sean Murphy, alongside my boy, Jeff Freddy, my boy who's always cooking it up. Dude, it
Sir.
is week 2 of the NBA season. How are you feeling, man?
Well, I could only speak for myself, Sean, because I think Pistons fans everywhere probably have a slightly different opinion. But I'm not freaking out. I think, as we expected, we talked about this. There's going to be some ups, there's going to be some downs, and there's probably going to be a lot of in between. So I'm not too surprised they're 1-2.
Yep.
They can still ultimately end up where I projected them to. So I'm not concerned at all. There's
Yeah.
some things we can nitpick, don't get me wrong. But overall, I'm not concerned moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. I think, like you said, there's a lot of things that, we can take away from these first 3 games. A lot of good, a lot of not so good.
Right.
But I think the number one thing that we can take away, I wrote an article after Pistons Knicks on Friday night. If you want to go check that out on woodwardsports.com. And one of the things that I said in that article is if game 1 was the representation of the Pistons' potential, I feel like the past 2 games have been the representation of the Pistons' youth. I feel like we've seen these last 2 games just how young these guys are, just how inexperienced they are with playing together as a group. I also feel like, Jeff, one thing that's been glaring the past 2 games for me has been how much they're missing Marvin Bagley and Alec Burks on the second unit. Because at the end of the day, if you can't have guys out there, 48 minutes that can go and create a basket, because at a certain point you need to rest Ivy, you need to rest Cade, you need to rest Bojan and Sadiq, right? So like I think they've been having a real difficult time with staggering minutes and figuring out how to give that second unit while they're waiting for Burks and Bagley to come back, which sounds like both of them are a few weeks away. That's going to be a little bit difficult for the Pistons to start.
Yeah, and I don't want to sit here and say, Alec Burks will be the savior, but you make a great point. Like Bagley and
He's at the
Burks.
very least a 14
Yep.
point a game scorer. And like, that's not
Right.
saying that like all of the Pistons problems are on the second unit, but when you're missing 2 guys on your second unit that are career 15 point a game guys,
Right.
it's going to make an effect no
Yeah.
matter what.
And on top of that, you have Knox up until last game because Livers was back, which he made a positive impact. So can't wait to see him moving forward. But
Mhm.
the first 2 games, you had Corey Joseph and Kevin Knox playing significant minutes, which isn't ideal. But again, you have your bench of Knox, Corey Joseph, Killian Hayes, who 17 minutes per game hasn't really been the Killian Hayes at least we'd expect, but you'd expect him to figure it out eventually. But the bench, I mean, isn't as advertised so far, and a lot of that has to do with not having, like you said, Bagley and Burke. So yeah, no doubt about that. They're definitely hurting not having those guys out there.
Yeah, for sure. And again, it's not like, like you said, there's been a little bit of struggle with Killian so far. Last night he was 2 for 4 from the field, a little bit less, aggressive as a
Right.
whole. Felt like he wasn't quite as much of a factor. His first 2 games, I believe Killian was 1 of 16 from the field, or 1 of
Yeah.
15 from the
Something like
field.
that. Yeah.
So definitely not like an ideal start. And again, we're not going to make any judgments or conclusions about where
Right.
Killian is at, this season until it's a few games in. However, I mean, you're seeing the aggression. It feels like a lot of times, like his jump shot still, like it's definitely improved. It still, has a ways to go because he did, he objectively started at what being one of the worst shooters in the league. That's just the way it is, right?
Mhm.
So, he might get to a better place this year. It's just have to see how that continues to go. I wonder how having some of those other players will help him with that. But at the same time, I think the big thing, let's start with some positives, before we keep diving too much into negatives. Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey both can play.
Yeah.
And both, I think, are going to be really freaking good players. I think Duren in particular has just been such a beam of bright light, right? And like, even though like last night might have been, like as far as his overall impact was probably, his worst game. When you look at on the boards, Jalen Duren only had 3 rebounds last night. But I mean, if he can continue to be an impact with, with his shot blocking, with, his defensive switching, with, his ability to get above the rim. The
Right.
thing that's impressed me a lot with Jalen Duren is just how mature and how composed he's been. And a lot of times when you're looking at players that are out of position, I haven't found many times where Jalen Duren's been one of them. So I think that's the thing for me that's been so impressive is that he's been a steady force for the Pistons at just
Mhm.
18.
And I think that's a lot. That's also part of the struggles, I think, with the Pistons because you're relying on two rookies that are a significant part of your rotation. There's a lot
Mhm.
of things those guys have to learn. But to your point, Duren, if we take out last game, through the first games, he was averaging like a rebound a minute or 2 minutes, excuse me. So the guy was out there being productive.
Yeah.
Defensively, that's where his value comes from. We were there opening night. You saw his impact when he was on the floor and off the floor. He closed a lot of the fourth quarter in the game. And for a player that's the youngest in the NBA, I mean, it's impressive. And this is
Yeah.
a guy who also fell all the way to 13 for the Pistons to get him. And a lot of teams are sitting there scratching their head saying, how do we let this guy fall out of our hands? So, yeah, Ivey and Duren, to me, even through 3 games, you can nitpick things like you brought up Duren last game. Obviously, wasn't as dominant of a rebounder as he's been, but still, the highs are very high. So, those
Yeah.
guys, you're looking forward to those guys' future. There's no question about it. Those
Yeah.
guys are studs, man.
Yeah, for sure. And even listening to like the Pistons Pacers commentary, from last night, Johnny Kane, said that Rick Carlisle said that jaden Ivey was one of the quickest players that he's ever seen. Just his game speed is no joke.
Right.
And I think, obviously I still think the jump shot still has a lot of room to grow. It's definitely not consistent yet. It's not bad. I mean, even last night he was 2 for 3 from beyond the arc. I feel like he's actually been pretty decent from beyond the arc, but you can tell there's going to be nights he's going to struggle shooting. And then the other thing too, like you and I talked about beforehand, before we got in this video as well, when jaden Ivey attacks the rim, a lot of times with his athleticism and with his speed, he was far and away the best athlete on the court each and every night. And he could go out, and if he was attacking the rim, the odds of him missing were very low. However, I think what we've seen over the past couple of nights in particular is that when you're facing elite rim protection talent, which the
Mm-hmm.
past 2 nights he's faced elite rim protection talent and Mitchell Robinson, who's currently an elite rim protector, and then Jalen Smith, who's going to be an elite rim protector. It was pretty clear we saw that last night. Didn't the Pacers set a franchise record for blocks in a game last night?
Yeah, I
Like
think they had
that's
3 guys in there. I think 3 guys in their starting lineup: Jackson, Smith, and somebody else combined for a total of like 10 blocks. It was ridiculous. 9, 10
mhm,
blocks, something like that. But to your point about Ivy, and this is something that Dwayne's even mentioned in the preseason, and even dating back to the summer league. Like you see the speed he plays with now. A part of that, and being a rookie, is he's got to learn to peel some of that back, or at least be more decisive when he decides to go 110 miles per hour. Which Dwayne said, "Hey, we love it. You're going 110, but we maybe just 95. Maybe tune
right.
it back a little bit." And you saw even in the first game when we were there, a couple of those layups he missed. And obviously in college, you're playing at Purdue. He's getting everything he wants at the basket. Now it's the NBA. These are different. Not only are these guys more athletic, but they're bigger. So that's something he's going to have to adjust to. And to be
Right.
honest with you, he's been more efficient than even I would imagine.
Right.
I thought he'd struggle a lot more early on. And all those things that we talked about, his passing and what he can do defensively, those things have showed up. So I think, and that's why the Ben conversation, which I assume we'll get to eventually, I still think like jaden Ivey his game is so multidimensional. He brings so many things to the table. And again, that's kind of the part of him and Cade. They still got to learn to play together. I think Cade,
Yeah.
in a way, has to be a little more, take initiative. I think there's parts where Cade's kind of like trying to fit in and deciding, hey, it's your turn. But Cade needs to be like, listen, earlier, because we know late they go to Cade. But I want to see Cade kind of insert himself a lot earlier. But I get it. That's Cade. And I'm
Mhm.
excited to see how these guys fit in and grow up together because they're both
Right.
really talented.
I think it's interesting because to your point, Cade picks his spots a lot now, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's a lot of times like the beauty of it is, and I think a lot of people, and with the Benedict Mathurin thing, real quick, I think a lot of people are looking at his 27-point game last night, which don't get me wrong, Benedict Mathurin is a stud.
Yeah, he
Jeff,
is.
you and I were big Benedict Mathurin fans going into the draft. We always said, if he was available, if the Pistons ultimately decided that that was their guy, we would have not been upset with that at all. The guy's
Nope.
going to be a solid NBA player for a long time. And I think that's pretty apparent.
Right.
I think a lot of people are seeing Paulo Banchero with 3 20+ point games to start his career. I think a lot of people are seeing, Benedict Mathurin with another 27-point game after having one in the preseason. And I think with Ivy and Cade, it's been a lot of 17, 18-point games, right? It hasn't been as sexy on the box sheet.
Yeah.
But Jeff, I think it's also important to remember that the Pistons have something that those teams don't have, and that's that it's that they have multiple players in their lineup who can go get 20+ points a game. I mean, Sadiq, we saw have 26 points the other night against New York. Bojan Bogdanovic had 26, opening night against the Magic. Cade, even though he was, like you said, he needs to be a little bit more, aggressive and needs to find his rhythm in the offense a little bit more. He had 22 last night, right?
Mhm.
Like, so like I think the thing about where the Pistons are at, yes, Cade isn't going to be the guy that's going to go out and get, 25 plus points a night, and maybe there is a point in this season where, and I assume that his scoring average is going to go up as the season goes on. However, again, the simple truth of the fact is currently constructed and going forward, the Pistons have more guys who can get buckets than the Pacers do. They
Mhm.
just do. The Pistons have more guys who can get buckets than even the Magic do. And the Magic have a couple bucket getters. They have Franz Wagner, they have Paulo Banchero, but outside of that, who's healthy? Who's consistent? That's my thing. So I think with the Pistons, a lot of it is, obviously, I know that these, stat lines aren't sexy, but like if there's any silver lining, I mean, Jaden Ivey double double with rebounding
Yep.
and scoring. He even had 5 assists to start the game too. If he was passing more throughout that game, I feel like he could have had a triple double last night. So I think the thing with it is that there's a lot of flashes of really good things. There might not be things that look sexy on paper, but like when have the Pistons ever been built on flashy box scores?
Mhm.
When have
And
the
another
Pistons ever been built with 25 plus point a game, guys? That's just not how they've been constructed.
No, and I think a part of that too is that any given night type of atmosphere where any guy can get you 20 any given night. And that's kind of been the historic. I mean, we had Isaiah Thomas, of course, who was that dude, but we're talking about
Right.
more specifically that '04 team. And I think this team currently, I think you said it best, to have the options they do, it's definitely a positive. And I think if we want to compare these teams, and we talked a lot about Memphis and what they did in 2019, and I want to bring them up for a second because Memphis
Yeah.
in 2019 to 2020 had a preseason over under. The odds were 27.5, similar to what the Pistons were. I think they were 28 or 29, if I'm not mistaken, the initial odds coming out of the summer. But the difference is, and this is why it's too early to overreact, because obviously these ratings were determined by the Grizzlies in an 82 game sample size. But the offensive rating, let's just go with that first. That team that year, they went 34 and 39 with Taylor Jenkins. I believe it was his first year actually coaching the Memphis Grizzlies. They just
Mhm.
drafted John Morant. They finished in points per game 14th out of 30. They averaged 112 points. Right now, the Pistons are 18th. They average 111 points.
Mhm.
Opponent points, which opponents given up. Obviously, right now the Pistons aren't that good. It's only 3 games in. They're 25th. The Grizzlies during their time were 21st.
Mhm.
So think about it, an 82 game sample size. Even the Grizzlies had nights where they were, it was ugly, but there was also nights where they were winning games. And I think that's what you're looking for to kind of, go throughout the season. We talked about 20, 25 games would be a good sample size to really see what this team is. And you're hoping, like, everyone wants to freak out, and I get it right now about
Right.
what they're doing defensively, different rotations. But as you brought up earlier, you don't have Burks, you don't have Bagley, you just got Livers back last game. You have 2 rookies who are still figuring themselves out through 3 games. And on top of that, these guys, through that amount of games, they have an opportunity to fix things. Guys, you have to give that. This isn't a team that's poised to go to the playoffs. I'm sorry. I know people, even
Right.
before, not everybody thought that way. This is a team that there's going to be ugly nights. There's going to be nights where we're saying, wow, they're playing great defensively, really good offensively, and there's going to be a mix in between. So that's why, like, even the Memphis team that year, they finished with 34 wins. Do I think the Pistons will get 34? That might be a little too high for me, but they
Right.
can certainly be around those rankings, similar to what the Grizzlies had that year. Just in middle of the pack. Middle of the
Right.
pack, win 30 games, and there's plenty of good things to take away from it.
Right. I think, looking at, also one big thing that's been a topic of conversation in the Pistons world has been the defense.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people, especially, the Dwayne Casey critiquers of the world, I should say it, go and look at his, switching defense scheme. And, in particular, I think especially when losing and when we're having rough nights on the defensive end, it's easy to point at the switching scheme and going, why are we switching on everything? Why are we switching on everything? And I definitely feel like, the Pistons, need to be, they just have to be better on defense. There's
Yeah.
no way
No
around it, right?
question.
They do. They know there's no question about it. Whether it's adjustments they need to be making with their lineups,
Yeah.
whether
Being in the right
that's
spots is
yeah,
another one.
being in the right spots, but also a lot of it, when you're looking at, a lot of times, I think we look at basketball, we talk about offense and defense, like it's football, where they're not connected, where they're completely separate, or it's two different units. But the simple truth of the fact is in basketball, you're running up the court to play both ends of the court.
Yeah.
And the decisions you make on the offensive end will ultimately set you back on the defensive end if you're not making good decisions. And I'm going through and watching this Pistons Pacers game. And what did I see? The first thing I saw that first quarter, the Pistons were making good decisions with the basketball. They were kicking it out to guys on the 3-point line. They were making their shots. They were getting back on defense because they were playing good offense. And then as the game went on, as they were getting blocked at the rim, as they were, as they were turning the ball over more, as they were taking, more rush shot attempts and missing shots and allowing Indiana to get into transition, that's when guys weren't back. That's when they were caught out of position. The simple truth of the fact is when you're playing this game, when when you're in the NBA world, and again, I'm not going to blame any particular players because I think this was a team thing, to be honest with you. I think this was just all across the board. Mistakes are made, turnovers are made, fouls are made, all that sorts of stuff, right? But I think at the end of the day, it has to start with better offense, taking care of the ball, being more efficient on that end, so that you're not setting yourself up for failure on multiple positions on the defensive end and giving up so many easy looks. And if you are going to do that, you have to make sure you're getting back on defense.
Yep. And I think a lot of that too, to kind of judge it, going back to the point about taking a 25 game sample size, is getting these guys used to playing with each other. Because going back to that Memphis Grizzlies team, a lot of those guys are still together. Like this team is now, you have two guys, Jalen, Duren, and Ivey, that are significant parts of your core, and this is their third NBA game. And people are expecting everything to click right away. It's just not. That's not the reality. Like there's going to be a time where defensively, if you want to talk about being able to switch everything, what I saw too is Jalen Duren also struggling in the pick and roll defense. Just him, and that, again, that's part of it. Just being a rookie. Like he's 18, and everyone forgets that he doesn't look 18. But you certainly can understand the fact that, listen, you're entering the league and now you're getting into pick and roll switches with some of the best athletes, some of the best players. I know they haven't played some of the best players, but still elite players in the NBA, like a Tyrese Halliburton, who's no joke. Like that's hard to do. So I'm willing to be more patient. I think that's the biggest word to use before we start jumping to conclusions. There's a lot of things. They got to learn how to communicate better. They got to learn how to know where each other likes to be defensively, knowing where your teammate is without always knowing. Just that chemistry that we've had with previous cores with the Pistons, whether it's 04, whether it's winning in the 80s. So for me, Sean, it goes back to that point of be patient. Like these things, it's going to get ugly early on. But if it's ugly through 75, 80 games, we can have a discussion. But right now, it's like, hey, if you want to nitpick and talk about things, that's fine. But I'm not worried about this team. Like, fire everybody, trade everybody. I haven't not gotten to that point yet. Especially when you don't have Bagley or Burks here even playing yet.
Yeah, not even close to that point, Jeff.
No.
Because at the end of the day, again, there's been so much good. There's been, there's been so many highlight plays
individually, which we asked for. Players are getting better.
And can I just say too that I even feel like another piece of it too, even if this team, let's say this team does lose a lot of games this year, right? Which I think you and I both agree, they're probably going to lose a lot of games this year. Reality. I think we're being honest. This team is objectively just way more enjoyable to watch than last year's team.
Absolutely.
And the team before, at the end of the day, this team is still not going to be perfect. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to, they're not going to be the best defensive team in the league. They're certainly not going to be the best offensive team in the league. You know what they're going to be? They're going to be exciting. They're pushing the pace more than they usually have. Right now, they're 9th in the league in pace. I have a feeling I could go up, especially with Jaden Ivey and Cade Cunningham, continuing to lead the court. And especially if they learn to, cause more turnovers, get on the transition more, I feel like that's going to help them as well. So, overall, I think there's been a lot of positive things. I think Bojan Bogdanovic has looked as advertised. I think, offensively, Sadiq had one rough game, but then after that, I think, he's looked pretty darn good. Obviously, last night shooting 5 of 16 isn't the greatest thing on the face of the planet. However, anyone that was worried about his usage rate, that seems to be out the window, eh? But
no question.
Yeah. But also at the end of the day, I think one thing that we just see is the talent's there. I definitely think there'll be, some winning streaks. And the Pistons will have another opportunity. They get a couple days of rest after their first back-to-back of the season. And then they'll be going on Tuesday. They will be going on the road to the Washington Wizards.
And think about that on a young team. You're 1-2, 2 of those losses on the road. That's the part of learning how to win. It's not just winning at home; it's winning on the road as well. And they led in that first quarter against the Pacers, and things kind of started slipping away. That's again, although it's a loser's mentality, it's still acceptable to be like, you know what? They started off really well, but like you said, a lot of those offensive errors kind of bit them on the other side too. So
Well,
it's not all just defensively.
Well, and at the end of the day, you have to learn how to win in the NBA. And what it means to win in
Yep.
the NBA is learn how to play consistent through 4 quarters. And I think, especially if you look at, this was a young team in their first back to back. This isn't an excuse, but I think objectively, if you look at how the things went, it looks like the team just ran out of energy in the second half. They allowed 72 points by the Pacers. They were losing momentum on the offensive end. I think they just, as a whole, I think it just makes their energy shot when they're already coming in with heavier legs from the travel, from playing the night before. It's easy to understand why it sets them up in that position. It's easy to understand why they'd be playing bad basketball at that point. That doesn't mean you can't point out when they're playing bad basketball, though.
Right.
But with that, what did you think of the Pistons weekend against the New York Knicks and the Indiana Pacers? Even though they went 0-2, was there anything that you were personally enjoying? Let us know in the comment section down below. But also, be sure that you're staying tuned in and subscribe for more NBA coverage, Pistons content, and everything, because we are the best in the business at it, baby, because this is what we do from half court. Thank you so much for tuning in. Go follow my guy, Jeff Iafrady, at Jeff Iafrady, and to check him out Monday through Friday on the Morning Woodward Show. And if you're feeling oh so generous, go follow your boy at Sean Half Court. But with that, we want to thank you so much for tuning in, folks, and we will catch you guys next time from Half Court. Be sure to subscribe.